All right, so last week, Disclosure did a remix competition where they made a song live on stream and then released the stems to their community to remix. The stems were released Thursday night with deadlines for the remix competition Sunday night. It's a super tight deadline, but I'm stoked with the remix that came out of it.
And it's by Otherwise Fine.
Otherwise Fine.
That's what he's...
I think I really like it. I can imagine it in a film. It's very film soundtracky.
Totally. These guys know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But no, you guys are dope, man. Please keep sending us stuff.
So I want to take a second to jump into the Ableton project and break down the remix. So this is the Ableton project for the Restless remix. The remix is pianos, guitars, some audio effects, which is mostly a lot of transitional elements and kind of top-end sparkle, synths for the verse, synths for the drop, bass, some orchestral elements like strings and brass, then kicks, drums, effects, and the vocals. Now, the track starts out with piano, and throughout the entire track, the pianos are E Majiro's piano for the top end and the key noise, and then Native Instruments Giant for the body and the low end of the piano. The track starts with a pedal note, and then there's an ARP that comes in halfway through the intro. For the chords, I knew I wanted to make it something more melancholy and more in line with an Otherwise Fine track. So although the chords Howard had played were awesome, they were just a little too extended and jazzy to fit the vibe that I wanted to use. Now, one thing that I do often is to bounce the piano to audio and then reverse each piano into the next. This allows the piano to kind of feel like it's moving forward and flowing rather than being a little more static, especially when you're playing held notes. So with the reverses and without. So it just flows a little bit nicer. Now in the drop, there's one extra melody that comes in. And there's a slight change to the rhythm. Just to give it a little more energy. Now for the second verse, I actually changed up the chord progression. This was originally something I had wrote for a bridge, but a bridge just didn't feel like it was necessary in this track. And given the time constraints of the remix, felt more logical just to use it as a second verse. So here is the chord progression for the second verse. And there's also a little extra kind of ear candy moment that I wouldn't quite call a melody. And that basically repeats. So this whole remix follows a basic pop structure of intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse 2, pre-chorus, chorus, with the second drop being a 4 on the floor feel and the first drop being a halftime feel. For the guitars, nothing too complicated going on. Again, I wanted to make this remix stand out right away. I knew most of the remixes were going to be house and garage, so I felt like adding some guitar to the intro helped convey the tone right off the bat. So the guitars, I actually played around with a bunch of different ideas and melodies, but kind of settled on this, which is actually a guitar sample that I pitched around and then layered with some foley that I recorded just of me kind of leaning back and forth in my chair to give it a little more realism. That comes in again in the second verse. And then just before the last drop, I layer in these kind of 16th notes, which are super, super low in the mix, but they just provide some energy leading into that last little moment before the drop. For the synths, so the first synth that comes in is actually this little pad, which is the same synth as the Disclosure pad that I'll talk about in a second, just playing the ARP super up in the octaves, going through Valhalla Shimmer. So it provides a nice kind of ethereal feel to fill out the spectrum in the intro. So without and with. The next synth that comes in is actually the disclosure pad. I named it this because I just copied more or less the preset that they had used on stream to recreate the same synth. Because again, I knew I wanted to switch the chords up, so I couldn't use the stems. So I essentially recreated it myself. So this is just some diva, again, using the patch from the stream, going into some shimmer. The other synths that I have here are what I call my Rufus synth. I call it that because it's heavily inspired from Interbloom, and that combined with some air give the track some nice grit and warmth in the low mids. So without the air, and then with the air. The reason I process those separately is because I actually automate the gain of this air channel up. So it provides almost a riser in and of itself. The other pads I have are a pluck to play the ARP. Now this is a Massive X synth. It is Plonk or something. It's one of the default, didn't even switch it. I really like this because, it was kind of atmospheric and airy, which is definitely the vibe I was going for. Finally, in the verses, I have this extra diva patch, which provides a little more grit and analog warmth, which is, again, something I really wanted in this remix. The only other synths I have going on are during the pre-chorus. There's kind of this sine pad, which is just sine wave going through a bunch of reverb and a little bit of noise, just to kind of fill some space. And then this drone, just again to keep the track moving along as it progresses. And sorry, there's one other, which is these low mids synth. So that is just to fill out, I guess, some low mids that I felt were lacking. So without, and then with. So super subtle, but just provides a little bit of width and warmth down there in the low mids. Now for the drop, it's actually super simple. I have this LCR super saw. So that's just a super saw down the middle, and then two panned hard left, hard right, with some different noise oscillators to give it some width. Then I have that same Rufus synth that I have in my verse synth patch, providing kind of the main low end grit and warmth. That same low mids synth patch that I have here, again, providing some width to that low mids. I have some air. So without, with. And then I have, I think this is the main synth, which is kind of some grit. Yeah, so super low in the mix, not making a huge difference. And then I have these three synths, which are playing some melodies and counter melodies and top lines. All right, so the first is doing this kind of little bleep bloop. To be honest, it's not doing a ton, just a little ear candy and giving some stereo width. The second is the same as this piano melody. Which is, again, just giving some interest. You don't really focus on that. But if I play the drop and I delete those, you kind of notice something's missing. So here's the piano and the synths without that melody. And then with it. So super subtle, but I felt it really added a lot to the overall track. And then finally, there's that top line that you heard just a second ago. which is really just filling out the high end. So the drop synths with piano give this. Now for the bass, there's actually 3 different basses in this plus a sub. So the first bass is just a basic Reese. Nothing going on complicated there. The second bass is the bass you hear in the first drop, which is actually just a square bass with some erosion. What makes this bass cool, in my opinion, is the glide. So with the kick, it just grooves really hard. And then on top of that is the Reese bass. Now, I've automated an EQ to scoop out all of the lows, a bit of the low mids, and then a bit of the low mids in the center channel. So I left them on the sides to give the track a little bit of width. I'll show you the bass a little bit of width, but I scooped it out of the mids just to make room for that square bass. On the last drop, I swap out the square bass for a Prophet bass and a sub, which I think, just a Serum doing the sub. The reason I don't have the sub for this drop is I liked the square bass, didn't feel like it needed any low end cleanup. But whenever I'm using the Prophet, I prefer just separating out the sub. So sub with the Prophet. In terms of processing, there's actually a decent amount of processing on this. So I originally had bounced it and then added some overdrive, some compression, some limiting, and then Devil Lock is actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this, which is from Sound Toys, giving it a nice little dark drive. So with the bass, synths, piano, we have this. And for the first drop, all right, so for the kicks, I actually used the kick from the stem as the top kick, and then just I think it's a Songo kick for the body of the kick during the drops. The one thing I did do though is during the kind of second pre-chorus, I knew I wanted to have a kick there to kind of keep the energy up of the track. But I didn't want it to be the same kick as the drop because I wanted the drop still to be impactful. So I just took the kick from the stem, and here where it's EQ'd, I didn't EQ out the low end. So here I'm EQing it, so it's really just the top. And here it's literally just straight from the stems. Could have done that on the same track, but a lot of times I like to just have their own tracks for this. Now for the drums, I've separated the drums into subgroups. So here we have the build elements, some crashes, all the top elements and anything extra, the breaths, the knock from the original stems that provided the snare, foley from the original stems, and then some claps and snares that I used to layer behind the knock. Now for the breaths, so there's one breath in the original stems, which is this one. And I really liked that moment. So I kind of used that as inspiration for the drop and all of the breaths that I used. So here are all the breaths soloed together. So there's about 7 or so breaths that I used that really kind of just play around in the stereo field throughout the drop. So those combined with the knocks is basically the whole concept of the drop. Then there's Folly, again from the original stems. That kind of provides almost like a hi-hat or shaker, but obviously needs a bit more rhythmic element to it. So added some congas and an actual shaker with some toms, just as the little fills. And then finally, wanted to have those knocks just have a little more impact and body. So it layered some claps and some snares. And there's just one clap track that kind of pans left, right. That keeps the track going. Now on the second drop, it's basically the same thing, just accelerating everything so that it fits a 4/4 structure. Also added a little extra kick, kind of give it this bounce. And that kick is just the same as this stems. I will say that ride is probably one of my favorite things in this entire track. So to break down this ride, just because I think it's interesting, it's from a sample. But what I did is I cut the sample up to create my own rhythm, adjusted the velocity, and then the Echo Boy into Valhalla Shimmer actually does a lot to give this ride a sense of realism. So just from the sample, changing the velocity and choosing different hits does make the sound somewhat real, but it still sounds cut up to my ears. So adding a little bit of Echo Boy and Shimmer gives it some shimmer. It was almost like having a sizzler on a ride. So if there's any drummers out there, there's this little kind of chain bead thing that you can add that helps the ride sizzle. And to me, adding a little bit of Echo Boy and Shimmer on top of that ride definitely makes it feel real. And that provided with the kick, bass, and drop is... Now, the one thing I've missed so far is these little audio effects. So the audio effects are essentially, for me, anything that's kind of top end, ear candy, nothing that you should be focused on, but that help the track feel more complete. So here in the first drop, this is without them, and then with it. So the first thing that we have is this little top line. So this is a piano that I bounced out and then added crystallizer to. So it's panning back and forth, left to right, adding a bunch of these little reverses that are fantastic ear candy to kind of complete the track. Now, additionally, there's this ARP, which is a kind of like a glockenspiel type sample. And I'm playing that against this kind of bell sound in the right ear. Again, just providing some stereo width and ear candy in top end. The other thing that's going on is this kind of piano noise sample. So this is just kind of a piano that's been run through Shimmer, distorted, reversed, run through Shimmer again, and then is panning from left to right. So a lot of EDM will have kind of crowd noise that's going on in the background that's pumping. It's kind of having a similar effect to that, just to provide the air to the track. Throughout the track, there's also these little moments of transition. And what these are is this synth that I've created, which is a piano going into a ton of reverb and distortion, bounce to audio that I then reverse into itself to have these little transitional moments. Same thing is going on here, except for it's a piano sample, but it provides kind of some melodic effects throughout the verse. And then finally, in terms of audio effects, there's this little OTR guitar pluck, which I really liked. To me, it kind of is very Odessa-y, and it was a nice little moment here or there in what otherwise would be a very sparse verse.
My eyes go to the phone, been silent for so long.
So yeah, just little small moments of ear candy. All right, so nothing too complicated going on here. Just some held notes of the chords with the strings and the brass tabs playing the arp. And then on the pre-chorus, have some pizzicato strings, again, playing that arp, just to help build the track. And then the second verse, same thing, except for now we have the brass playing some held notes as well. So last but not least are the vocals. So for the vocals, did a ton of different ideas, but landed on kind of doing a little bit of a vocal chop on the drop, and then doing some slight parallel processing for the verses. So for the first verse, we have the dry stems running through just a little bit of EQ and tune. So for the tune, I am tuning down the formants ever so slightly.
Told me a name, whispered something sweet, then
But I wanted to retain the tone and feel of Howard's voice. I didn't want to go too overboard with the processing. So in parallel to that,
told me a name.
I do have some heavy formant shifting. And on that, I have the delays and the reverb. So I'm doing the parallel processing for my reverb and delay with two different channels rather than some sends. And I'm then side chaining that parallel processing to the dry signal here. So this way, I'm kind of getting the effect I wanted with some heavy formant shifting without taking away too much of the original.
I keep calling every night, she don't answer, but tonight she might.
And for the chorus, or pre-chorus in this case,
It's more than I can take.
doing the exact same thing.
My eyes go to the
So I have the main vocal, and then the formant shifted one. Now with this, in the stems, there was also the main take and the harmonies. So I also did the same thing here. Except for I made these super wet and kind of gradually brought those in. So the vocals all together.
Are you on your own? Happy all alone.
Now, the one thing to also mention is these vocal reverses, which I think are doing a ton considering how sparse the track is. So here I'm just bouncing out part of the audio with a really, really long reverb tail, then reversing that into itself. So here you can hear that. And then I'm doing an auto pan on that because these are so lush and down the middle. I really wanted these to stand out. So doing a heavy, heavy auto pan left to right helps these stand out in the mix going into the next vocal.
Silent for so long. Say
Now the last little part, I guess, would be the vocoder and the chops. So for the vocoder, pretty simple vocoder. Just using Ableton stock vocoder and Serum as the input. To be honest, it's pretty low in the mix.
time.
That was something I was just playing with. Wanted to be a little bit more
Like my eyes was
energetic and full in the second verse going into the last pre-chorus. But given how stacked the harmonies are, it's not doing too much. All right, so for the chops, chops are pretty simple. Basically, just took the chop, threw some altar boy for some drive, room, and then a long reverb, adding some air with virtual mix, and then some EQ and soothe. So there's that one, which is kind of the choir, I would call it. Then in the second half, there's this kind of Do you remember me? Take me. Do you? So similar processing, going through Little Altar Boy. I do have the RX declick on here just because of the way I was cutting the samples. I was getting clicks. Normally I would just go through with fades, but I was so burnt out that I was just trying to get as many shortcuts as possible. So Altar Boy, some overdrive for these because I wanted them to be a little grittier than the main choir one, and then soothe and some pan man left, right. And then finally I have this kind of filler. So there's this choir one, and then there's kind of a bar and a half of gap. So I wanted to fill it. So I have this kind of reversed moment into this second note to fill those gaps. So on its own. Now for the second drop, it stays the exact same, except for I add one additional element to fill out kind of the high end on the very last half of the very last chorus. So this is some Little Altar Boy going crazy on the formant shifting into Pan Man, into Valhalla Room. So that, with the drums and the ride, to me is actually probably the highlight of this remix. So to me, that moment is super, super nice, full, and sparkly in the high end. And it really helps kind of peak out the energy at the very last half of the very last drop. So all together, very last half, very last drop. So without it, super subtle. But just really helps kind of finalize the track with one last moment of high energy. All right, so that's the remix. If there's anything I missed, feel free to leave a comment and I'll be sure to get back to everyone, or head over to Instagram, shoot a message, and I'll get back to you there. Be happy to do a follow-up video on how I process anything in more detail if anyone wants that. Hope this was useful. Hope you enjoyed. Be sure to stream the remix. It's in the description, and be sure to head over to Disclosure's Twitch and say hi in the chat over there. Big ups to them for doing this remix competition and for listening to 4.5 hours of submissions on stream the other night. Anyways, hope this was useful. Catch you in the next one.